1:20.
Yes,
Quite
you
enough
do
time.
have another meeting.
No, I'm just trying to make sure I keep track of, not dwelling too long on, kindergarten or something.
Right. I did go through the questions earlier with Gail, and she said to me, keep me on track. Every one of these questions, I think, would lead to a longer discussion. There's a lot of interesting things here, but let's start at the beginning. How does one become Gail Asper? Tell us about the early years for yourself, where you were born, about your childhood.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this wonderful day. I hope you guys are having an excellent session before and after, and I'm delighted that you're actually in this, what we call a route. This was the first route that was actually built in this museum, and it was going to be the education route, and we thought that's what this museum is all about, is education. So it's actually very moving that you're actually doing this in the route, the education route. So I was born in Winnipeg. My parents grew up in Winnipeg, and I was born in Winnipeg, went to public school, Robert H. Smith, River Heights, and then Kelvin, and led a pretty ordinary life. Walked to school 4 times a day in raging 20 below blizzards and so on. And had a great time doing following my passion in high school, which was musical theater, and then went to art. I didn't really know what I wanted to do in terms of university, so I did arts at U of M, and then well, I don't know if I think it's after we're getting into university, but had to decide what my career was going to be. So I always had a passion for the arts. I've been involved with volunteering for the arts, and I love singing and acting, not so much dancing. But I had to make a decision about whether I was going to go into the arts. But we'll follow that in a minute.
Back to that.
But a perfectly ordinary upbringing, and the only thing that was interesting was my dad. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was always there for us. My dad was a super hard-working lawyer, but he basically was around. When we were growing up, he got up at 8:30 in the morning. He was out the door with his coffee, slurped his coffee and off to work.
And in fact, let's spend a little bit of time on that, because you had a very busy father, but also a very well-known father. And I'm just wondering, Gail, was he a role model for you in your life? And what lessons did he emphasize in you? I know he wanted you and all the kids to go to law school. That's one thing he did want. But did he instill some values in you? Did he think of himself as a role model for the kids?
My dad was always teaching or lecturing, he was a great, charming guy, but he was a tough taskmaster with certain expectations, which were you're going to get an education, and my parents paid for our education. My brothers, I have an older brother, David, and a younger brother, Leonard, and they said, we will pay for any education you want. We don't want you to have to struggle to get that education, but you are going to do well, and if we are paying for it, you're going to, get the best marks. So all through school, it was always like, you got a B+, well, where was the A? And, so he was always extremely demanding. He also believed that you have to work. Everybody should be able, and particularly for women, he was a, quite a traditional guy, excepting for women, as a lawyer, he'd seen a lot of women who didn't know anything about what their husbands were doing and were sort of at their mercy. So if they broke the bank and these women were out on the street, or if they had to get divorced, he said all women should be educated and able to walk out the door and look after themselves, or if their husband drops dead of a heart attack, they should be able to look after themselves and their family. So he insisted that I get a practical education. So he said everybody should be working, and nobody, and that, I mean, being a stay-at-home mom, he had no problem with that. He said, you're working to look after a family, that's a great thing. He really believed everybody should also be involved with volunteering. So, you have to pick his 3 passions in life that he thought everybody should have were family, work, have a rewarding thing that you're doing, and make a difference with volunteering.
I remember he even told me that, so it wasn't just to his own kids, actually.
Yeah, it was like, they don't take up space and try to leave the world a little better place than the way you found it.
Absolutely. In terms of expectations, and I know he expected you to do well in school, but what about in life generally, and how much of that, Gail, was it your own internal expectation that you feel you want to do well, not just to impress your parents, but did you feel that pressure?
My dad was, extremely hard on my brothers, especially my older brother, David. And I think my mom has the saying that she thinks that the first children are like the first waffle you make in a waffle maker. You're just trying to testing it out, and you should throw out the first waffle because you're just getting it straight. How many, I don't know how many are the first kid or the second or the third kid. By the time Leonard came around, who cared when he came home or, whatever. And Mom says, I think his birth pictures were on the same reel of film as his graduation pictures. It was just, but the first kid always has way more pressure. As the middle kid and as a girl, I don't think I had any expectations, which was good. Dad was a little bit sexist in that regard. He said, of course, work hard in school, but whatever you want to do is just fine by me. And I got off really easy.
You did?
Yeah, so any expectations were on, but then he was a little confusing because when I did go to work for him, it was suddenly like, I need you on call 24/7, okay? And that was a very high expectation.
Right, so being an employee was different than being a daughter.
Absolutely.
You mentioned your mom, who was a wonderful woman. So tell us about what you remember of your mom and the role she played in your upbringing.
So my mom was the best mom ever. I know you all may think your mom was, but my mom really was. She was the perfect sort of person who was supportive but demanding and always there for you. So when I was doing my music festival things, she would be there leading the standing ovation or cheering me up when I totally blanked at the piano, which would happen very often, which is why I'm glad I'm not in performance for a living. So she was just incredible, and she was very even-keeled and just a good, super smart, no pushover, but just the kind of mom that you wanted who would support you. And she was very busy herself with volunteering. So we grew up with both of our parents rushing off to volunteer and go, work on committees. So she was busy, but she had a great sense of humor and great sense of adventure. One thing is, my parents were early travelers. My dad could never travel as a kid because he was working 10 jobs. So as soon as he started making a little bit of money, he said, go and explore the world. So that was another thing. Be curious, get out and explore the world. So they were going to Japan and China in the 60s, where there was nobody spoke English. You didn't know how to get around. There's no Google Maps. So they instilled in all of us a love of travel. And for my mom, the one thing she told me too about, say, raising kids, she said, teenagers, you think that the kids need you when they're babies? Wait till you have teenagers. They need you, and they're not always around. You got to be around for them. So she gave some really, really good advice, I think.
You go to university. Tell us a little bit about that. But really, what I'd like to know is, did you have something in mind? Did you have a career in mind when you went into university, or was that just Dad saying, everyone has to go through law, and then you'll decide what to do?
I always wanted to be a teacher. I would have been a great teacher, I think. I wanted to be a drama teacher and a French teacher and maybe the music teacher and do the choir. And then I don't know how I got onto the law, except that I think I love drawing on blackboards. And then I thought, if my whole basis for establishing a career is based on blackboards, what if they get rid of blackboards? And in fact, they have. It's now those whiteboards. So it's a good thing I didn't become a teacher. And apparently I'm quite impatient. With my kids and their piano lessons, apparently they describe me as a shrieking harridan. Why are you getting that note? No, I said F sharp, God's sakes. So my husband said this is not helpful, and I was banned from the piano room. So anyway, I wanted to be a Broadway musical star. I wanted to be Maria in West Side Story on Broadway. So I'm 19 years old, and I get accepted to the Banff School of Fine Arts for their summer program. And I had a great time, but I look around, and I see, oh my God, there's so many more people who are way more talented than I am, way more beautiful, who are going to get employed way more easily than I will. So I came back very dejected. And my dad himself had wanted to be a jazz pianist. He came from a family of musicians. And he said, you know what, Gail, I play the piano every night, and you can sing every night, and we'll play the piano and sing together. But he said, the worst lawyer makes a way better living than the greatest artist, except, for maybe the superstars. So, as I've said, you're a woman, I'm starting my business, I might, bankrupt our family. You need to be able to look after your mom. I think you should go to law school. And he said, if you go to law school, first of all, law school is great. It's an incredible adventure for your mind, and I totally agree. I loved law school. He said, but you also, it's like in The Wizard of Oz when the Scarecrow, he's brainy, but he doesn't have the piece of paper. And then when the Wizard of Oz gives him the piece of paper, it says, now you can show people that you've got a degree. He said, if you've got a degree in law, people will give you more respect. They may hate you, but they will respect you. You can just say, look, I'm a lawyer, so don't mess with me. You may not know what you're talking about, but this is a piece of paper that you won't regret. And believe me, no matter what you do in life, it will take you in many different adventurous ways. If you don't know what else to do, go to law. And I'm so glad he told me to do that.
So before we get to part of your story, which has sort of led to your sitting here with us today as a leader, there was a series of years where you were working beside your dad, under your dad, reporting to your dad, and as you sometimes have said, sort of being in his wake a little bit. Tell us about those years and how you dealt with them.
Well, I was finished law school, and I had met my wonderful husband, Mike, when I was 19, working at Elizabeth Defoe Library. He was working in the reserve section of the library, and I was in circulation. So we were known as Gail from circulation and Mike from reserve. And that's essentially what we're like, because Mike is a bespectacled, freshwater research scientist. He's the chief scientist for the Experimental Lakes area. And we've been through quite a struggle for the last few years saving the Experimental Lakes area. And I was the gregarious gal in circulation. But we met, fell in love, and he got a great position to do his PhD out in Halifax. And our deal was I would marry him and follow him wherever he went, provided it was in Canada. And I thought he'd go to Toronto, so I would begin my illustrious law career in Toronto or maybe Vancouver. I never expected to be in Halifax. I didn't even know there was anything after Montreal. Who knew? I recommend you go to the Maritimes. It's stunningly gorgeous. So I was kind of exiled to Halifax where I didn't know anybody. And nobody knew Izzy Asper. Because by then he'd been in politics and he was in business, so he was a pretty big name even back in the late mid-80s. So we go out to Halifax, I get a job, and I really loved my firm, and I loved being in Halifax, and I knew I got the job on my own, worked there for 5 years, and I could actually see pursuing a nice career in law. My career would have been, be an associate, and then become a partner, and be parts of, get involved with the Bar Association. I love the legal community. Lawyers are really fun. They believe in changing the world, so they get involved with community things. And then I thought, maybe I'll be a judge someday, and that'll be my life. And we'll go to the Bar Association conferences all over, which are lots of fun. So that's how I thought my life would go. And then my dad called me, and he'd been having heart issues. He'd had a major heart attack when he was 51. By the way, I thought he was so old at 51. I thought, well, he's lived a good life. I'm 56 now. I'm thinking, oh my God, he was a baby. But when you're, 25, 51 seems ancient. But by the time he was 60, he said, you know what, if you're doing this corporate commercial law, and by the way, it was not negotiable in our family. I wanted to do family law, and he said, you got to study tax, you got to study business organizations, you got to, do practical things, don't go into criminal, they're not nice people. So anyway, I ended up working in corporate commercial law, which I highly recommend. Corporate commercial law is a great area because you're dealing with people with great ideas and people who have money, and you put those people together and amazing things happen. They don't call you in the middle of the night, to get you out of jail. They're generally happy people, whereas in family law, they're quite unhappy, and they pay their bills. So I actually really enjoyed working in corporate commercial law, and then Dad called from Winnipeg, and he said, you know what, you're doing all this corporate commercial law for others, why don't you come and work for me? You know, I could, drop dead of a heart attack anytime, and I want somebody in the family who knows what this business, which was CanWest, he was just starting it, what this business is all about, so you'll know the management people, you'll know if you have to sell it, you'll know how to sell it and who to sell it to. So he convinced me with a lot of effort to come back to Winnipeg. And that was really hard, because I wanted to come back to Winnipeg, but to go from being your own person, making your own money, being independent, to working for your dad, almost like getting an allowance. Again, and then you're mixing business with family, and what if you are a bad employee, and that can change your relationship with the family? So took a lot of persuasion, but some of the guys I was working with said, "Are you crazy? This guy is one of the greatest entrepreneurs. You can learn so much from him, even if it's horrible. You should definitely give this a shot. You can come back to Halifax anytime." So my husband Mike got a job working at the Freshwater Institute, and I came to work for my father. And I think the very first day of work, we won a major lawsuit. My dad had been suing and countersuing his partners, and we won this lawsuit. So I walk in, and champagne's flowing, and it's like everybody's doing cartwheels down Portage and Main. And I thought, well, this could be kind of fun. So I got to work with my dad in CanWest, watching it grow for 14 years. And I am so incredibly glad that I did. I learned so much from him.
Tell us a couple of things that you learned watching your dad during that time.
I learned how much hard work it takes to be successful. People always say, "Oh, you just got the magic touch." Dad was one of the hardest workers and the most, he would research anything to the 9th degree. Like, when he was a lawyer, you get told, like, you're going to represent some client on some issue that you know nothing about. And as a lawyer, you actually have to research it and dig into, faulty drywall or something. So then by the end, you know everything about faulty drywall. So the same thing within business. He said, I don't know how to run television stations, but from his time in politics, he thought, I think the people who actually have the most control in life are people in the media. So I want to get involved with media. So he brought on the best, engineers and broadcast people to start CanWest. And he studied with them, and he, got the best financial advice. He learned that, the worst thing that can happen in business is to be undercapitalized, and everybody always underestimates how much capital they need. So I'd say it was the due diligence and hard work that he put in, and persistence. That was the other thing, because he had this great saying that some of you at the business school may know from the Izzy Asper room. All that's needed for you to succeed is to be more persistent than the folks who are trying to stop you. And so I would say that it was his tenacity and persistence that really, really inspired me.
And that's a theme we've heard of today too, from different leaders and also in academics, the persistence and never giving up. But something happened in your life to change that in 2003. And you ended up becoming an accidental leader. So if you can maybe take us through that process and the decision that you had to make.
Well, first of all, I was never the sort of person who would automatically volunteer to lead anything. Probably just lazy. But one of the things my dad had always said, and I thank him for that, was when you can take a leadership position, you should. And that kind of related to my volunteer world. So I was involved with MTC, Manitoba Theatre Centre, and they asked me to be the president of MTC. And I thought, that's somebody 20 years older and far more accomplished, somebody running the banks. But he said, no, go for it, and work hard, and they need you, so do it. And by taking some leader positions early on, I learned that it's trial and error, and you do your best. What my dad had started doing in the late 90s and early 2000s was transitioning out of running CanWest Global Communications Corp and having fun with philanthropy. And he had taken money from the company and the days where there was plenty of dividends, and he started building up a charitable foundation. And he wanted this charitable foundation to be as entrepreneurial as his business. He said, I wanted to do things that, but for our involvement, wouldn't happen. And one of the things that he was very concerned about as a proud Canadian and as a grateful Canadian was that he didn't think the Canadians really understood how lucky they are to live in this country. they didn't even know what rights they had and didn't understand how those rights had come to be and how hard fought for those rights were. So he said, we should start a trip that takes 9th grade students, 15-year-olds, on a trip to Washington to see the Holocaust Museum and other freedom institutions, to teach them to come back and be grateful and to be vigilant. Because he said, if you don't know what you have, you don't know when you're losing it. He said the most important thing is complacency. Kids should remember to vote. And all this. So we started this trip to Washington, which was the inspiration for building the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And this was all Dad's idea. I just thought, we don't have any museum in Canada that celebrates our human rights, so I thought you just have to keep going to Washington. Dad, being an entrepreneur, said, no. We will build a museum, and we'll build it in Winnipeg, we'll create jobs, and we will celebrate our heritage of freedom. So that was all his thing, and I was basically going to help fundraise. And then, and so we announced this in April of 2003 publicly. Dad and I set out raising money. It was really fun. We were motoring around Manitoba, meeting with entrepreneurs and raising money. And we were about to go to Vancouver to meet with several major entrepreneurs in Vancouver when I got a call from my brother that my dad had died. Like 4 months after we announced the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, I was, 43 years old. I had kids who were 11 and 13, which is a needy time of their lives. And my dad had dropped out of a heart attack. So we had a huge decision to make in our family. First of all, of course, the company needed to be looked after, and that was a hugely big issue because my dad was still a very major part of the advising on the company. And then he had this very difficult, challenging project that needed tons of money, and we still had to convince the government that it should be in Winnipeg and give us operating money. So we kind of did a huddle with my mom, and this is where my mom comes in. My brothers and I, we all talked, and we figured there were so many people that were so supportive of the idea of the museum that we should give it our best shot. Because my dad also really believed that, failure is not failing. Failure is not even trying. So you just, there's no shame in failing, and failing for sure is how you learn, and you're going to hear that over and over again. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. You can't win the lottery if you don't buy the ticket, whatever. So we said, we'll give it our best try, and I was kind of tagged as the person to lead this initiative. But the other hero in this story, because there's thousands of heroes, but the other unsung hero was my mom. Babs Asper had been in the sort of shadow of my dad, and we never really noticed her, but she was incredibly bright and hardworking and a real classy broad. And she was the chair of the foundation. And she said, we are going to do this, and I'm going to do everything I can to help make it happen. So when she said that, I knew this. We were just talking about shared leadership and the importance of shared leadership, and I think our model was definitely one of shared leadership. So it wasn't me. It was like a group plus thousands of other people, rowing in the same direction.
You embark on this with your mother, with your family, with a cast of thousands of people who were helping you.
And Mo Levy.
And of course, Mo Levy. But there were many, many challenges along the way, ones that would fell an elephant, ones that would make most people walk away and say, this is impossible. Can you tell us maybe one or two and how you dealt with it? Because obviously we're here right now, that means you got past it, and what did it take to do that?
We were facing so many challenges. We were facing taxpayer association challenges saying, why would you ever build a big museum? Culture's stupid, it should all be funded, privately. So we had, the Potholes Association. We had the Cavers Association, the Citizens Against Virtually Everything. Those are the bloggers who sit in their basement and take shots at everything, who never do anything, but they criticize. And I didn't really pay attention because I don't even know how to access any of that stuff, thank God. Because if I read those things, you'd say, well, nobody wants this. We had people who were concerned about what the content of the museum was going to be. And there were, everybody, we had talked to every group across the country to see if they liked the idea. And fundamentally, the groups that we talked to said, absolutely. Whether you were Ukrainian, Jewish, you were Aboriginal, whether you're from the Black Women's Congress, so many different groups, the Francophonie, the disabled community, gay and lesbians, everybody said this is a really, really good idea. So although there seemed to be a lot of people saying that it wasn't in the media, we knew we had 50 organizations that had written to the Prime Minister saying it wanted to happen. But the change in governments was probably one of the most frustrating things. We had Jean Chrétien. Jean Chrétien totally believed in the project. He said, I know what it's like to be on the outside looking in, so I want this to happen. But then Paul Martin came in, and Paul Martin didn't really see the point. He said, we've given you 30 million, and that's enough, and we're not giving you any more, and they were fundamentally against it. And we were pretty much dead in the water. And I remember a lot of nights crying in my kitchen at 2 a.m. thinking, we're dead. Like, we have tried and tried, we've talked to every minister, it's not happening. But we've been working with the opposition because our advisors had said, always be working with the opposition. So we've been working with Stephen Harper in opposition. And I'm a well-known Liberal, but we just agreed to work together and I made the case. And then lo and behold, he became Prime Minister, which was a shocking thing. But when Stephen Harper became Prime Minister, the opening line from his speech was, the West wants in. And I'm like writing that down, and we met with him, and he said, Prime Minister, you said the West wants in. I gave him my graph on cultural funding and on how little funding the West gets and still gets in cultural funding. He said, wow, I didn't realize that Manitoba gets like $50 million less a year than Nova Scotia in cultural funding. $50 million a year in cultural funding that Nova Scotia gets that we don't. Now, why would that be? You could build a museum every 2 years with that money. Anyway, it was, and of course being away from my family, traveling to Ottawa, that was extremely hard. I got a call from my son, he was 11 one time, it was 100 below, and he wanted to ride home. And I said, Jonathan, I've been in Ottawa for 3 days, did you not know? He hadn't actually quite noticed that I wasn't home. So that was kind of heartbreaking. The change in governments, the naysayers, and just not knowing if we were going to get there.
Now you mentioned your dad having persistence, but it sounds to me like this is turning into a story of Gail having persistence.
So we, of course, thank God, I'd seen my dad in action and I knew all I can do is my best. I am not Izzy Asper. That was the other thing. Like, here was a guy, when my father died, he knew every politician, he was popular with everybody, he knew every billionaire in the country, he was a Canadian Hall of Famer, and he had a proven track record in business, he was extremely successful, and every door was open to him. And then you lose that person and you're frankly a nobody. Like, I had done some work around Winnipeg and chairing the United Way, but I really didn't have the reach that he did. So we had to regroup and bring in people that we knew who did have that reach, so we had to go much more grassroots. And it was, having that kind of a situation thrown at you was not how I had seen my life. I wanted an easier life. I wanted him to do all the heavy lifting, and I just wanted to be the person behind helping. Because leading is really stressful and lonely, and you don't know if you're going to succeed. I give full credit to all those entrepreneurs out there who have a vision and work like hell to make it happen. What was the...
No, you're just in telling and answering that question, you're letting us know that while leadership is hard, and also in this case, building this museum was almost an impossible task, and yet you brought it done. There's a lesson in it.
The thing that kept us going, and we had a great team. Mo Levy, the executive director of the Asper Foundation, who has been a professor at the business school, the U of M Business School. Mo knew he's the most optimistic person, so we surrounded ourselves by optimistic people. Totally positive people for whom, no was not in their vocabulary. We laughed a lot, we loved Monty Python, we drank a lot of red wine, we sang, singing. We had all of our motivational songs like Tom Petty's Won't Back Down, or, just song after song that we would use to cheer ourselves up, and ain't no mountain high enough, it was really, really important to just keep using, and also quotes, like quotations like Winston Churchill, when you're going through hell, keep going, or never, never, never give up, or Nellie McClung, never apologize, never retract, never I forget the third, but just get the thing done and let them howl. So, and watching my dad persevere had also been an inspiration. We had thick skin, a little too thick, but we just knew that perseverance was going to be the key.
I have a couple more questions, but we have a Q&A session, so why don't we just start opening that up, and maybe I'll end with a couple of my questions. So let's open it up to the crowd here. Does anybody have any questions of Gail? Anything. Could be on something we've talked about, something you've wondered about, something you're doing that you want to ask Gail about. Who's brave enough to ask the first question? Oh my God, Mark is going to ask it.
Gail, what are you doing now?
Well, I'm president of the Asper Foundation, and our mandate still continues to do transformational things. So I'm still very involved with the Human Rights Museum. I sit on the board, and we still need a few things done here. But we've turned our sights to a funny little project in Israel, where, there was a great quote that I read recently that said, memory is sacred, but victimhood should never be the cornerstone of anyone's identity. And for Jewish people, studying the Holocaust is extremely important. For many communities, there's been tragedies, and people want to make sure that those tragedies are recognized. But I think fundamentally, we all need to think about positive things that our communities have brought forward. So we want to build a new museum in Israel that actually celebrates the contributions that the Jewish people have made to civilization over the last 3,600 years. Things like the Ten Commandments, or Einstein and the theory of relativity, or Jewish humor, and so kind of actually have a really fun, positive message so that people, especially Jewish kids and Israeli kids, can learn a little bit more about their people, because apparently 70% of Jewish museums are Holocaust related. So that's the new project. Plus, we do want to make sure in Winnipeg that we continue focusing on building our community. We are, this is our favorite city in the world, and we love it dearly. So, whether it's social services, the arts, and so on, and this museum, we want to make sure they fulfill their true potential.
And I'll just say, because you mentioned the Asper Foundation continues to do all the good work here, and the community at large in Canada, and in addition is taking on this project. So lots of stuff on your plate.
And there was somebody else back.
Yes, here we go. George.
Gail, what are you passionate about? What are you most passionate about?
Well, I am passionate about Winnipeg. We were talking about, making Manitoba, frankly. I think this is a beautiful, beautiful community, and I don't like people taking shots at it. And we now know we're a transformed community for so many reasons, whether it's the Jets and the Polar Bears and the Human Rights Museum. So I love my city. I love my family. I am passionate about, I could go to a musical theater production every day of the week. So I still love the arts, and I still love singing. And I absolutely follow the human rights stories with extreme interest. I didn't know all the stories about women's rights in Canada and other communities, and so I really am happy to see that this museum is continuing to tell the stories. I should just say one other thing that I didn't mention, which was the importance of taking advice. I think one of our real reasons for success in getting this thing done was we always went in saying we have no monopoly on good ideas. And I really, when I talk about the cavers, I don't listen to the evil bloggers, but I think we really did listen to people we respected, and we did change paths. We didn't ever make any compromises. Interestingly enough, the architecture and the content of this place is pretty much as we envisioned it back in 2002. But I learned a few things. I learned not to write nasty letters about politicians in the newspaper because they might become the Prime Minister. I did write a nasty letter about Stephen Harper when I never thought he was going to be Prime Minister. And it's really not the most productive way to negotiate and I think we need to tone down what's going on between the federal government and our Premier. They need to go behind doors and actually work things out. So I would say the arts, my family, musical theater, and this museum, and Winnipeg.
Do we have any more questions? One more? Samantha Maury.
I'll try to be short.
So you talked a little bit about the content of the museum. So my question to you is, how hard was it to choose which exhibits go into the museum and to satisfy the different wants and desires of different groups in Winnipeg?
Well, actually, this was the work of a very fantastic advisory council of human rights experts that was put together first by our group and then augmented when there was actually a museum staff. And they, had several hundred thoughts on what should be in the museum, even in the Canadian Gallery. They did a cross-Canadian consultation, cross-Canada consultation. But there were some of the big stories that we all knew had to be there. And museum people have to make choices all the time, whether you're an art gallery or not. You have to decide, okay, which artist is going to be featured. And so they came to some decisions, and they knew that things can change and evolve. But because the museum is it's got a lot of digital stuff, you can actually go deeper and deeper and find a lot of stories. There's thousands of stories in the museum. So they didn't have to worry too much about the physical space. You could, go to the kiosk. But the advisory council, I think, did a really good job. And the interesting thing is there was a lot of worry and complaining and protesting before the museum was done. Thereafter, I would say every single community that was concerned has been very happy. And I know the Jewish community is one I'm from, and we're never happy, but, and there will always be things that can be better, but fundamentally people are pleased with the way things have turned out. And areas that may have been weaker, we had experts come in after and say, you've got to remediate this, and they're working on that.
Now that question wasn't a setup question, but we're hoping everyone is going to stay for the tour afterwards, and you'll get to see all the exhibits if you haven't already.
And go to the gift shop, and boost the economy, and buy some stamps. I think they still have a museum stamp. It's really cool.
Gail, on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you not only for speaking today, but for stepping up to be a leader when you did, and to acting like a leader for all those years, and persevering and building this wonderful museum. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.